So this is basically how we got the engine, brought it home, minus the distributor and the hole. We got a box of parts here and a bunch of brackets that were already all sanded and painted nicely. Basically, we scored picking up a fuel tank when we were missing the tank and the sending unit because they were rotted off, and the owner said he checked them. So I was looking around our local wrecking yard for parts for the RT Baker, and came across fuel tanks, 40 bucks compared to 300 and change that it would cost us, plus the sending unit. I also scored some 5/16 tapered bolts with not a Phillips head in it for the door hinges, but a Robertson. So we're going to use those if we come across the 3 bolts that I need at a flea market somewhere. I'll pop them out and put them in. Same with the fuel tank. Fuel tank gets us through a couple of years. It starts leaking. We can change that tank anytime. So I'm not too concerned about it right now. Since that was in the budget, found out that there's a nice engine shop just down the road that has a dyno. So we are going to get this engine prepped, getting it ready for the dyno, and the previous owner stopped at the rockers because he was going to put roller rockers on it. For now, we're going to put the original rockers back on again. We're going to clean them up and pop them back on again. Roller rockers will add about 5 horse. I don't think we're that concerned to spend another $300 for 5 horse. We're going to put on the dyno first. So we're going to put the push rockers back in it again. We're going to put our distributor in properly, run our wires. I'm going to assemble the whole front and make sure that we have everything. But for the dyno, all they want is the pulley on the water pump, and that is it. They will have their own fuel supply, but they will also have their own starter, which is on the dyno. They want to put the headers on. So almost, if you can see behind the Studebaker, most of the parts are off the wall, which is nice to see. So here we go. We're gonna just try and clean stuff up a bit and start assembling. So here we go. When we bought it, he said it was numbers matching, and I didn't do the homework on it because he showed me all the paperwork. But the paperwork for the GTO says engine code YZ, which was the 360 high output, which made the GTO more desirable because it was everything except the ram air. So in 67 they had a ram air. It wasn't a ram air, and that's not the functioning hood scoop, that's just the type of heads that was on it, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I scraped the paint off, and I didn't want to do that when we bought it because he did paint it. But I'm thinking with the time code is on the back. The first is a letter, and that shows the month. The next 2 digits, or 1, is the day of the month it was made. And then the last number is the year it was made. So 7 should be 67, 9 should be 69. This is a 9, so it's a 69 block with and out of our 67 GTO. So this is not the original engine. And now when I looked at the letter code here, we've got XH. And when I looked at the build sheet on the 67, there was no XH. But I thought, well, it must be an M. And that was disappointing because the XM is the 255 horse model with the 2-barrel carb and the 8 and change to 1 compression ratio. So I was a little bit upset. So I went on a Pontiac website, and there is an XH code, and that's the 350 horsepower version of the 69 engine. So this code didn't exist in 67, but it does in 69. Of course, the heads are different. I see a 71. So they started actually putting the dates on the Pontiacs after 69, I think. So I'm pretty sure it's 71 heads on a 69 block. So there's the 71. When I type these numbers into the Pontiac website, it's not registering this this number, but the X, that's definitely an H code. So I'm okay with that. I'm sure that with the cam in there, the intake headers, the HEI ignition, and the 650 Edelbrock, it should still put over 400 horse. So what we're doing is
about 500 foot-pounds of torque, pretty close. The good thing about it, even though you're not a numbers matching engine, is that you're a period correct engine.
Right.
You're not running a 389. You're not running
it's not orange.
Different. You're not right. So you are running the high horsepower. So,
right.
350 was just one notch down. It was considered a hypo engine.
Right.
Like it was not the base or the station wagon or the torque motor. This was, I think the only difference between the 360 was the cam.
I think so, yeah. And again, he's gonna check what cam is in there. I don't know what lift is, what duration it's got, and he'll be able to tell us that, and he'll be able to set up the carb and the timing and everything according to that. I don't work with these every day, and might as well. And still, I want to see that dyno pull. I want to see the sheet. So
it's gonna be a good motor.
Yeah. Oh, 2 sensor. Or shoelace. I don't know. I don't think we need that. Probably was this one. Shocks. I think we got new shocks. We don't need those. We valve cover gaskets, cork, which are kind of crappy. Dipstick tube for the tranny. That's good. I was needing that. Looks like water pump gaskets, maybe like a universal kit, although they're exactly the same, so I don't know what that's about. Oh, valve seals. That's great. Priority valve for the brakes, which is good, but we are missing the master. Sort of rubber, which slid around. I'm thinking some sort of mount, maybe. Lug nuts. Hey, here we go. It's got blue paint on it. I don't know if that's part of the engine or not. That's fun taking over other people's projects. The rest is just crap. We never throw anything away. This all stays put. I think this is important. This is important. These two are important. And my power steering pump and my alternator. And I think that's enough to assemble the front cover. So for cleaning parts, I really like the baby wipes, mainly because you can buy a couple thousand of them and they only cost like 20 bucks at Costco in Canada. So in the States, it's probably like 6 bucks. They're covered in alcohol, so they actually do a really nice job of cleaning parts off. They don't leave the little fibers behind like terry cloths do. So nice to just quick wipe. They're already moist, and you don't feel bad using hundreds of them. So this is the distributor that is going to go into our 400 Pontiac, and you can see it gets driven by the camshaft, and it's got a slot at the bottom that drives the oil pump. Most older engines with a distributor run this way. Pontiac engines, distributors run backwards. That's why Pontiac and I get along so well, because we usually do things different than everybody else. So before we put our distributor in, and now that we've got our rockers on, we're going to prime the engine. And what works best is an old distributor that you can gut and cut the top off and then put a drill on there, and then you can drive the oil pump, keeping in mind that you drive it backwards. Remove your oil filter, crank it over until you start seeing oil coming out of your oil filter. Make sure your oil filter's full with good quality oil. And then keep turning, and it should take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes before you actually start seeing oil coming through, and that's okay. If you don't have one, you can use a screwdriver and a drill. Don't recommend it though, because you do risk snapping the ears off if you start getting off center. I am going to use the screwdriver because I feel confident in my abilities, but I'm not going to tell you guys to do that. I think the GM, the Chevy 350s and that, they might actually have an oil plug that hits the distributor in one of these spots and use the distributor to transfer the oil between heads. So unless you used an old 350 Chevy distributor, you might not see oil loop getting to your one or the other heads. I'm not sure. There's also a plug in here. I can feel it with my finger. If that plug is missing, then you won't get any oil pressure at all because it'll just dump right out and your head won't get lubricated either. So that has to be installed when during assembly. And there's a plug at the back here that you can, a little frost plug more or less, that you can pull out to get at that. So we are going to put our valve covers back on again and start setting, before we do that though, we're going to find number 1 on compression stroke so we can put our distributor in the right position. Here we go. So now we've got oil pressure. I know that I feel comfortable in turning this engine over even though it hasn't started in a long time. Now I want to find compression stroke on number 1. So I can see that this valve is starting to go down. The engine turns counterclockwise sitting in the passenger seat. So if one of the valves is down, it's between intake and exhaust, or exhaust and intake, whatever. So we need to go another full revolution, and then that would mean that it's on the top of the compression stroke and about to go on the power stroke. And that's what we want, top dead center of compression number 1. So that valve just came up. My piston's going back down again. Now what I can do is just put a flashlight in the hole or stick a small wire down there and feel when that piston gets to the top. Or I can just look at my timing mark on the front pulley and let's see, should be coming up. Something should be coming up. There's a mark. So I'm at 0 degrees, top dead center. The camera's having a hard time picking it up, but I can see that there's a piston right there. I can also go to my timing marks now, and I can see that mark there lines up with 0. Then the number right underneath that is 6, and then it's 12 underneath that. So I know that that piston, because the valves are not rocking, this number 1 is on top dead center of compression. And the Pontiac cylinder location is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, with 8 being in the back passenger. So now I can put my valve cover back on again, and then I know to put my distributor, once that's on, to point that at number 1, which will be at the back somewhere. So here we go. These holes filled up with oil, and you can see that there. Now it's very bad if you stick a bolt in there, that oil has nowhere to go, and you got hydraulic lock. What you'll end up doing is cracking this, so you want to take a blowgun and blow that out. I'm not going to show you guys that because I'm going to get oil all over the camera, but make sure you do that. And that applies to all head bolts, any bolt really. Make sure that hole is nice and clean. So this distributor is called a HEI ignition system. So this is your ignition module right here, and this is the only thing that will break on this distributor really that is going to leave you by the side of the road. So it's very advisable to have one of these with you, and they're only about 40 bucks. So really the distributor plugs into the cap here, one more wire for your battery or your ignition, and then your tack if you're running a tack inside. So basically you want to point it, the distributor cap has a notch in it, so it can only sit in one spot, and that notch is right here. So if I line that up sitting right here, the distributor cap right now, this would be my number 1 spark plug wire. All it does is drop it on, and you want to make sure that you're able to turn it both ways to set your timing. And we'll get into that afterwards, but you can't have it where it's sitting up against your intake or up against your firewall. You kind of want it in the middle and still have it pointing at number 1 cylinder. So there's number 1. Cap dropped on nicely, and I'm thinking it's right about there. So I can take my clamp and kind of snug down my distributor now, and I know that my distributor is pointing at the number 1 which is at top dead center and ready to fire. Now it's snugged down, I can just tighten my 4 bolts here again. I wish they wouldn't have put a red distributor cap on, because other than my brake lights, there's really nothing red that's going to be on our car. A nice blue one or a black one would have been much more desirable. Alright, now we can start wiring number 1 to our number 1 cylinder. So before we start running our wires, here's our spark plug. We want to have a 35 to 40 thou gap. So this is a spark plug gapper. 40 thou it calls for 35 for a 1969 block. So this is what we have. Just want a nice tight fit. You can open the gap by bending it one way, or closing the gap, bending it the other way. And we go along and check all of our gaps and adjust them accordingly. And you can see that's pretty tight. I can't get that in, so open that up. That's about right. Like that. There we go. So this is the spark plug set that I got in there. It's only got ends on one side. Not a big fan of these, just because I like to have them sealed. I know that there really isn't a whole lot else to them, but I'm going to start with the longest one and start with the farthest away. Plug it in and make sure you feel that click, and then I'm going to route it and cut it to size all on the distributor there. So I'll run all the wires and then do the timing as it goes up the front there. So here we go. I always start with the longest wire. That way if I screw up and I have to cut it shorter, I'm not stuck for wire length. If you do cut your shortest wire and you're too short, well, you're SOL. So at least this one's probably long enough to they can all move over one and still have enough to make it to the distributor. So there's my number 1. There's my number 1. I'm going to set that one up, leaving lots of room so I can make it look nice and neat. And then away we go. So for these wiring, it's basically just go online and figure out the firing order and your cylinder location, draw it out on a piece of paper so it's right there for you. Firing order is 184-36572. To set these, to make these spark plug ends, cut them to about the size that you want. Give just a hair extra. Just cut it back about a 3/4 inch or so until you have the center wire nicely exposed. And in case you mess up, that extra little 3/4 lets you try again. Looking for a nice clean cut here. That's better. And then I'm going to lube it up. Don't be shy with the lube, because otherwise it will get frustrating trying to shove the boot on. And this lube is probably the same as what would be on your brakes for your slider pins. Some easy brake lube will do the same thing. Spread that around a little bit, and then put a little bit on the end of your boot there. And then it is a 90 and you got to go around the corner, so I kind of make it as straight of a line as I can and then push it through. And if you can't do it by hand, just push it through with some pliers. But now I've got the wire coming out the end here. You can see that. And then you just take your little clip here, and I fold that little wire over and tuck it in on the back side so it's touching the steel. And then take your pliers. This is an 8mm wire, and it says that on the wire, and on your crimper there it says an 8mm for a crimp. It's got a little knob there, and even though it doesn't work that good, better pliers might do a better job. I can never really get a factory looking crimp. That's why I don't like these homemade wires. Okay for little tractors and stuff, but that's holding it nice and tight, and then turn it around so it's facing the right direction. And I kind of half pull, half push the boot back in again while straightening it out again. It gets kind of tricky. I can just push that boot back again, making sure that it's pointed in the right direction, obviously. And there, it's on the end of my boot. And then you want to hear that nice click when you know it's in place. I don't have my separators. I'll run to the records and grab some of those little forks that click together nice and grab the wires nice and neat. I only have 3 wires on one side, so I've got to pull my cap off. I can just unplug these 3 wires and then tilt the cap one way. You can route them all on one side so it's nicely tilting one way, but that's your own preference. And then I got my wires nice and neat run on the back and off to the sides, and we're going to throw my exhaust manifolds on just because I want to see them on there, and then we're just about there, ready for the carb. So this is the engine together for the most part. Now I get to take it all apart again, just the headers and the alternator and the power steering pump, so we can bring it to the dyno. We have a engine dress-up kit, and that's part of that Edelbrock intake, but we're sticking with these Mickey Thompson aluminum headers. They're a little nice, thicker, better quality. This really is just garbage. Pretty complicated to get this all together. There's one bracket that goes from the front, one to the back, and then this bracket, the big aluminum bracket, goes over to the head. And I have an issue here where it calls for a washer here, but I'm wondering if this bolt is wrong, because if you can see my gap there, I have a space there, and this bracket should be tight up against that, and then this bracket bolts to the alternator here and to here, and then actually with a nut and a bolt in this slot right here to actually tighten the tension on the power steering pump. So you gotta look into that. There was 2 spacers that I was missing that attached this plate to the power steering pump, and it's not this bolt, it's the 2 on the back, and I'm missing those spacers. That's what you get when you buy somebody else's project. But for the most part, I think everything's here. We're missing a starter, and going through our box, I know we're missing our master cylinder. Not a big deal. Grab a couple of those. I figure there'd be a few $100 here and there that we have to get. This is I was able to turn 4 boxes into 1 now by putting all the pieces back. Got our rockers in, got everything together. So we've got our Edelbrock 650 on there, and we'll make another video on how to go over that. Just to kind of tune that and go over the carb, show you guys what's involved with the carb. But I just wanted to put it together, clean up some boxes, figure out what we have, and as soon as the weather turns nice, because I only have an open trailer, we'll saran wrap this thing up and drop it off at the dyno shop. Here we go.
Hey, you're still watching, great. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You never know what you're gonna get. If it's got a throttle, we work on it. Help support the channel by picking up a Tape Boss off tapeboss.com.
And remember, if you're not filthy, you're not rich.